Hi, Jamie. Lovely to see you. And Jamie is a PhD student here at the University of Bedfordshire, and he's researching English medium instruction, EMI, and potential development of second language L2 speaking tests. He's been a teacher and a teacher-trainer of English as a second language for over 20 years in Japan. He works for several global English language test providers as both a speaking examiner and training others to be examiners for multiple English language qualifications used in general secondary and higher education. So Jamie, I will disappear and leave you to it. If you'd like to share your slides, let's just make sure that we can see those.
Sure, 1 second. Can we see them?
I can see your screen. Yeah. Do you want to? That's it. It's just loading. That's wonderful. Thank you. That all looks great. Right. I shall take myself off screen and hand over to you. Thank you, Jamie.
All right, thank you very much, Nikki. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here today. I'm Jamie Lesley, as said, a full-time student here at CRELLA. My supervisors are Professor Fumio Nakatsuhara and Dr. Chihiro Inoue. The title I'm presenting under today is a close approximation of my thesis title. My talk has 5 parts, starting with a PhD timeline and overview of my research. I'll share a few highlights from my literature review, give an outline of the research design, and talk about my progress with my 3 research questions. I aim to finish within half an hour and leave time for questions in the last 10 minutes. So let's move straight to part 1. My PhD course began in March 2023, as did my literature review. That fed into my eventual research questions, project design, and methodology. Those are in blue at the top of the vertical axis. In October 2023, my planning was checked in my first internal assessment called Progression Point 1, and shortly after I received ethical approval and started contacting professors at the target university about participating. I also started piloting my testing instrument and formally collecting data, and you can see those 2 in green. Last November, I had my second internal assessment, Progression Point 2, and at this time, my coding and analysis was underway, and that's still in progress here in September 2025, as is the writing of my final thesis. So that hopefully gives you an idea of where I currently stand. So to tell you more about the project itself, this is a case study of a university in Japan with EMI courses across 4 years of undergraduate study. Like many universities offering EMI, improving second language English skills is not an explicit learning goal, but assumptions or expectations remain that they will develop, and it's the lack of evidence for second language development in EMI, in particular second language speaking, where my project comes into its own. So what is EMI, and why is it worth investigating with second language speaking in higher education? Let's find out in part 2, the literature review. EMI has been defined in different ways over the years, but Jim McKinley's recent definition in particular resonates, explaining as it does that EMI is the teaching of academic content through English in settings where other languages have traditionally been used as mediums of instruction, with an intention, stated or unstated, of developing learners' skills for using English for specific academic purposes. Typically, there are 3 core elements: the language medium of English, an academic subject studied through English, and learners whose first language is not English studying that subject. All this positions EMI quite closely to 2 other teaching approaches, CBI and CLIL, and with EMI, language is by most definitions a vehicle for content learning. In CBI, this is flipped, and the content is a vehicle for language learning, while in CLIL, both language and content operate as dual learning targets. All 3 approaches are seen in higher education, but my focus is limited to EMI. For over 2 decades, EMI has continued to expand in higher education worldwide, and Japan is no exception. Despite this growth, there are still areas of EMI that are unknown and questions unanswered about how well content knowledge is acquired and whether second language skills actually develop as a byproduct of the approach. And the main barrier to confirming EMI's effectiveness, linguistic or otherwise, is a lack of valid assessment tools. Instead, research has often targeted what it's like to experience EMI, what it is challenging about it linguistically, and what minimum English proficiency is needed to teach or learn it effectively. In light of this, calls for more pre-sessional and in-sessional training have been made repeatedly, as well as greater collaboration between content teachers and language teachers. There have been investigations into second language development in higher education, as this list of studies attests to. However, they are limited in scope and number, and speaking was largely overlooked, making only brief mention in 4 skills studies like Evans and Morrison, Roger and Yang. But even in those, speaking took a back seat to other skills like listening and writing, leaving it as something of a neglected Cinderella skill. Another consideration for a study about EMI and speaking in higher education is deciding what kind of speaking takes place to then know what kind to assess. And as Bas Sturckmann detailed, there's a range of common single speaker and multi-speaker tasks and activities, including seminars, classroom discussions, presentations, Q&As in lectures, and office hour tutorials. But no single type of academic speaking or codified speaking skill set that we can as easily point to. Now, test validation studies for IELTS, Cambridge Main Suite, and TOEFL have explored second language, spoken language in higher education too, and they have documented common speaking types found there. But again, academic speaking itself was never concretely defined or classified in any of these studies. This has led some in the research community to question whether academic speaking exists at all. And like these characters from Futurama, I'm also skeptical. Let me explain why. Firstly, as Ken Hyland's work on genre and discourse analysis detailed, there is no single academic context, and communication varies significantly across different disciplines and communities. And with no single academic context, there is no single form of academic English, and by extension, no single spoken mode of that English either. Secondly, there are some differences between writing and speaking, as Douglas Biber highlighted in his corpus studies. Linguistic differences between these two modes are not absolute, and ultimately it's the register, the context, and convention that dictate what type of speaking is appropriate. Because of this multi-dimensionality, it's perhaps inaccurate to talk about academic speaking as if it's a single entity. Hence, as a label, academic speaking is something of a misnomer. And it seems that instead, it's more appropriate to use the term speaking in specific academic contexts and to delineate by the specific educational context in question which types of speaking are required. All right, let's quickly recap some of that. So far, I've outlined what EMI is, how it compares to CLIL and CBI, and its increased use in higher education worldwide and in Japan. Despite this expansion, research has struggled to pin down what learners actually gain, either in content knowledge or language development, largely due to a lack of valid assessment tools or measures. Much of the literature focuses on the experience of EMI rather than outcomes, and while there are studies on second language development, speaking remains underexplored both in Japan and the rest of the world. In fact, the idea of academic speaking itself is problematic. It's rarely defined, varies by context, and may not exist as a single unified skill. This leads us to the central challenge, understanding what kinds of speaking are actually required in EMI settings and how we might begin to assess or support them, which is the gap in the literature that my study hopes to fill, if only in a small way. I'd like to move on now to the research design and methodology, starting with details about who's taking part. This is a single case of one university, a liberal arts college in Japan, offering bilingual education in Japanese and English to a relatively small student body of around 3,000, most of which are Japanese nationals. Undergraduate degrees last 4 years, and in keeping with a liberal arts education, a range of subjects and disciplines are studied in the first 2 years before students select majors for the last 2. Around a third of all courses are EMI, while the rest are in Japanese. And students initially undergo 1 to 4 terms of EAP training, depending on their English levels upon matriculation. And these EAP classes run concurrent to their EMI courses in those first 1 to 4 terms only. Regarding my other participants, I enlisted the help of 5 primary departments of economics, politics, public policy, international relations, and international studies. And their involvement dates back to January 2023, when I conducted preliminary investigations and lesson observations, gaining insights about how different departments tended to handle speaking and how much class time was given to it. As this helped me decide who best to approach. And from these departments, 4 teachers volunteered. 2 taught only economics, while the others split their teaching across more than 1 department. And after starting the academic year with 16 students who had volunteered, I lost a few along the way and ended it with 12. Here's a demographic profile of those 12, with 8 whose first language was Japanese and the rest with other L1s. 2 of the 12 were first-year students, 3 were second years, 5 were third years, and the last 2 were fourth-year students. On average, they reported starting English levels of around IELTS Band 7 or CFR C1, and 2/3 had experience living or studying abroad. You can see some departments listed on the far right, but actually until students reach year 3, departments and majors aren't fixed, owing to the liberal arts approach of targeting a broad subject base in the first 2 years before specialising later. So we have a small cross-section of the EMI student body. Let's turn now to the research questions. 3 in total. The first one extends understanding of speaking as an academic construct in EMI contexts. The second provides new understanding of how speaking potentially develops as a byproduct of EMI by testing learners not just in pre and post tests, but all 3 terms of 1 academic year. And the final research question documents learner perceptions of the EMI experience in relation to speaking and their language support needs over time. Research question 1 precedes the others because establishing what the EMI speaking construct is must happen before such speaking can be tested or students can be asked to reflect on it. This research question uses multiple sources of publicly available information in syllabuses, grading criteria, and a public website, as well as internal handbooks and department portals. And with those, I'm using document and thematic analysis for the documentation, descriptive statistics for the surveys, thematic analysis again for the interviews, and function analysis for the observations. Findings from the analyses and the ways they converge and cohere helped me to determine what speaking in EMI classrooms is expected to occur and what actually does. Research question 2 is about identifying and measuring potential changes in speaking proficiency. For this, I developed a speaking test that I used 4 times in the 2024 academic year. A test output is being coded to create 2 data sets, the first handled quantitatively for linguistic measures of complexity, accuracy, fluency, and total production, and the second for interactional effectiveness, which is being qualitatively analysed. For my last research question, I have 3 sources: student surveys, interviews, and focus groups. The surveys were analysed using descriptive statistics, while thematic analysis is targeted for the pre-test interviews and focus groups. As noted here, the reflections themselves are geared towards the research question 1 construct of speaking and the possible changes in speaking proficiency in research question 2. And as I said earlier, the starting point for everything is research question 1 and defining the speaking construct, which was essential for me to develop this testing instrument in research question 2. And the combination of the expected speaking in research question 1 and the potential improvements in speaking that my research question 2 is mapping out are the general targets of what students were asked to reflect on in research question 3. My 4th section is a chance to talk about my progress and what I've found out so far. My document analysis for research question 1 began with me screening public documents from March 2023. And once departments and teachers had given formal consent to participate, I reviewed other internal documents through till February 2024. My surveys were done in the same month, and when I flew back to Japan to recruit students in April, I conducted interviews with the 4 teachers too. All data and analysis for these are done and dusted. For my observations, I attended portions of 6 classes in January 2023, totaling 3 hours of preliminary investigations. After that, I documented another 30 hours of 23 full lessons through the 2024 academic year. And these listed months, April, June, and November, were chosen to confirm continued suitability of my testing instrument through that period. All data have been collected and are being codified with a modified version of the O'Sullivan et al. Observation speaking function checklist, which I've extended to 40 functions from the original 28. I'm coding the recordings of the simple presence versus absence of targeted functions, and I'll be getting 10 to 20% of the observation recordings co-coded for the purposes of intercoder reliability. When it comes to findings, there was a clear sense of the university's philosophy of dialogic liberal arts learning in the EMI programme and its core principles of communication, collaboration, critical thinking and problem solving, especially in institutional literature and teacher syllabuses. Generally, teachers favour speaking in small groups or pairs, with discussion the most routine activity and one that often incorporates post-task reporting to the rest of the class and fielding questions from other groups. Presentations are standard, but mainly feature at the end of terms as assessed demonstrations of what students learned. However, observations and pretest interviews revealed that speaking opportunities were not uniform. And in lesson observations, for example, some teachers allocated far more time for speaking than others. Entire lessons might be 100% student-centered and student-led with group work, while other lessons were dominated by a teacher-fronted lecture that took up 3/4 of the 70-minute class time and only a 10 to 15-minute window at the end for students to verbally interact. And pretest interview responses confirmed that this variety was fairly normal to experience. So speaking in the EMI programme operates along a spectrum of duration, frequency and opportunity to talk. Teachers also identified specific functions as priorities, and you can see some of these grouped here into 4 categories of information, interaction, negotiating meaning, and interaction management, which are the same 4 categories in the O'Sullivan et al. Function checklist. I'd like to share some sound bites from my teacher interviews about these functions, starting with opinions, and justifying them. Fingers crossed this works.
So the one point where I always, well, not always, but most often have to encourage them to elaborate is to justify the answer. And I wonder to what extent that has become more I feel that it has become more prevalent with the rise of, when we had the 3 years of pandemic and multiple choice questions. It seems to have cultured our students out of automatically giving a reason. So I do sometimes prime them the first week, saying like, if you give an answer, try to explain why that is the answer. But quite often when we ask, what do you think? They will say, I think this. And the follow-up question is like, okay, well, why might that be? So that's the one part that doesn't come naturally. So that I think is the part where I need to prompt them most to use a specific skill from that list.
And here's another teacher talking about the importance of disagreeing.
I think our students in my classes are very good at group work that is collaborative. They're very good at allowing others to speak and maybe not as strong in making sure they say their view. And in a group discussion, they're very good, I think, at hearing what other people have to say and like choosing something they agree with and like being collaborative and friendly. And I think in the work world, I would like them to be able to use those important skills, but also be able to have a dispassionate argument where they clearly disagree with someone and say that clearly and explain why, instead of always choosing the point they agree with. I would like them to be able to say, not even like, I disagree with you, but that's wrong because X, Y, Z.
The audio with this next teacher has a bit of background noise, but you should still be able to hear the professor explain how he differentiates average from strong student performance in relation to connecting ideas and collaborating to construct meaning.
So in the example of group work, you'll see some students just answer the question. Other students will relate their work to what was said before, and they'll say, okay, for example, Shen mentioned this, we have a different view because of this. So that means they listened, they digested, they compared, and then they synthesize new information. So that's the kind of skill set I'm looking for, rather than repeating some talking points. That represents a digestion and interpretation and synthesis, and what I call unanticipated extension, creating knowledge based on what they said. So that's a good example.
And the last clip here I'm going to play doesn't pertain to any particular function, but instead targets the key role confidence plays.
I think the main issue in most of the students I have, and it's correlated across all the speaking skills, just links back to confidence. And I don't feel like the students' skills are particularly, asymmetrically developed across all the skills. With the students that I have, the main challenge is confidence. And of course, these things feed off of each other, because the more confident students will speak more often, therefore they'll get more practice, therefore they'll be more confident in the future. And a part of that also students who've taken classes with me before.
Now, confidence and familiarity are two things I want to cycle back to later in research question 3. But for now, on research question 1, let me add that all these listed functions, plus others, were factored into my test design, which I'm about to get to next. So that was research question 1. Let's shift gears and look at research question 2. For this, I conducted 48 tests with each of my 12 student volunteers, completing 4 tests each with me in the dual role of examiner and interlocutor. Those tests took place in the 4 months listed, and all data are coded. Transcripts are created and cleaned, but coding and analysis are ongoing. The test is delivered online, partly for logistical reasons of me being in England and the students in Japan, and partly for the convenience of recording and transcribing the spoken output through the computer. It's a test taken by students individually, because although a paired test would allow for more genuine dialogic interaction between EMI students to occur, it would also come with a certain loss of control for me, so I deemed it safer and more manageable to keep matters one-to-one. The test lasts 20 minutes and has 3 parts: a combined warmer and interview, which helps settle the candidate into the test, followed by 2 longer tasks. The first is a role play, in which the candidate both facilitates and contributes to a discussion, and the second is an integrated skills task. This test format is a product of several influences, not only my research question 1 findings, but also the Test of English for Academic Purposes, or TEEP, an A1 to B2 level speaking test developed in Japan for gauging high school students' English upon entry to university. It's also informed by the Council of Europe's CFR companion descriptors of C-level discussion interactions, mediation and language use, and O'Sullivan et al.'s speaking function observation checklist. Additionally, all test aspects were crafted using sociocognitive test spec proforma to link the language use of the test to that of the EMI classroom. And the format you see in the green box was reviewed and revised through 2 rounds of piloting, with guidance from both the Aiken Foundation of Japan's test development team, who also co-developed TEEP, as well as testing experts here at CRELLA. I've mentioned a few times that I'm still in the process of coding and my analysis is pending, so I don't have much by way of findings to share yet for research question 2. I'm also a bit cautious about what gains, if any, those findings might reveal, as dedicated language study was not students' main focus. Many were already at C1 level proficiency, and while a year is longitudinal, a multi-year study would likely provide more time and scope for speaking skills to potentially mature and improve. So in lieu of actual findings, let me share the full list of my research question 2 data targets. We have the 5 broad criteria on the left for fluency, complexity, accuracy, total production and interactional effectiveness. And across those, there are a total of 27 measures in the central column, with test parts, each measure being applied to, listed on the right. Now, I don't want you to think I've done no coding at all. So here are some example fluency measures. I'm using 4 types. Breakdown fluency, which refers to hesitations, both filled and unfilled, that disrupt the flow of speech. Repair fluency, which is the ability to recover from disfluencies like full starts, repetitions, and fillers via self-correction and reformulation. And I'm also charting 2 speaking rates that are each a calculation of spoken output units per time units. In this case, the output units are syllables and time units are seconds. And the first of these rates is articulation rate, which excludes pauses. and reflects the efficiency of the motor production of speech itself. And the other is speech rate, which includes pauses in its measurement and reflects the overall speed of spoken output. Collectively, I'll use these measures to chart different aspects of students' fluency, keeping in mind that spoken interaction is, of course, spontaneous, and the burden of real-time language processing will inevitably impact the continuity and smoothness of delivery, even for the most able or polished of speakers, as will the nature of this test's purely dialogic interaction, as opposed to a designated monologue task from which measures are often sourced under speaking test conditions like IELTS, for example. So that gives you a small glimpse of how my linguistic measures for research question 2 piece together. Let's look lastly at research question 3. This research question has 3 sources, and I successfully administered the survey at the start of April 2024, and the coding and analysis followed soon after. Pre-test interviews took place on the same schedule as the test themselves, and while all data are collected, I'm still in the coding and analysis stages. The same is true of the focus groups, which were held at the end of March 2025. I do have a few findings to share with you, though, for research question 3. Firstly, from the survey responses and also pre-test interviews, it was evident that students found pair work to be the most comfortable speaking activity, followed by group discussions, presentations, and whole class reporting, which they felt least comfortable doing. Interestingly, the functions that students identified as the ones they were less effective at using, such as justifying, evaluating, and connecting ideas, were also the ones that teachers earmarked as most important for effective course engagement. In pre-test interviews, all students noted the difficulties of subject-specific vocabulary in their EMI courses, and it was also clear that students with different English proficiencies had different challenges when speaking. For higher level students, it was wanting to sound more academic by using more formal language, which some were self-conscious about. And for less proficient English speakers, there were more wide-ranging concerns, such as needing more time to think, being afraid to speak up or check understanding when needed, particularly when grouped with much higher English speakers. So there were a range of obstacles. As the years progressed, students reported a general sense of increased comfort when speaking, and that came from being more familiar with the EMI program, both in terms of teaching styles and studying alongside classmates, which points to the value of strengthening social bonds to help foster confidence, which you may recall was singled out by a teacher earlier as being an important factor for speaking in EMI contexts. Another highlight is that higher level English speaking students who started the year worried that they sounded a bit too casual for the context experienced a sense of growth in using a more formal spoken register. I'd like to play you 4 short segments from each of the 4 pre-test interviews with one student to chart her thoughts on formality and register over time. Here she is at the start of term 1. Here we go.
I'm not the best at writing and speaking in a more formal sense. Yeah, so I can talk very casual, but I'm just really bad at being like, oh, I believe this, whatever. And
So it's a formality challenge, you mean?
I want to
That's
sound
the area
fancy.
you want.
Yes.
You want to sound fancy. Nicely good, nicely good.
I know the audio was a little hard to catch there, but the last thing she said was that she wanted to sound fancy. Now, at the end of term 1, she explained about seeing a connection between the academic writing she'd done and this goal to speak more fancy, as she put it.
Since I had a lot of practice to write academically again this semester, I got in touch, I guess, with the words that you normally don't use in casual conversation unless you're talking about something formal. And I think that did help with my formal speech also.
In what ways did it help with the formal speech?
Because like I said, I had to kind of dig up more formal big words out of my memory, and that kind of just stays in the back of my mind, and I can use them when having to talk in more formal situations.
And when we met again at the end of term 2, she talked about seeing her professors using what she felt was a formal academic register and trying to do something similar herself when in group discussions.
An easy way to explain it is that Oh, well, I know that in Korean and in Japanese, there are two ways to say circle, which is you could say like the 동그라미. It sounds like round and child friendly, you know, that's the way kids call it, but you can call it one, which is like actually a kanji in like the more advanced way. And because I'm Korean native, I'm good with the advanced vocabulary. In English, I knew of them, like I understood them when I would read it, but I wasn't used to using it. But because like the professors speak in formalities and I talk in formalities, I try to talk in formalities when we're doing discussions, I've gotten better.
And at the end of the academic year, she summed things up as follows.
I'm doing better, but it depends on if I'm in the zone for it. Because if I'm just not quite there, like maybe something happened or I'm tired, I'm not as good with speaking academically.
So those are some examples from the pre-test interviews, which just leaves the focus groups. Three initial areas have stood out so far. Firstly, vocabulary, which was universally highlighted as a challenge, and several groups said they would like more coverage given to key terms in advance of them being needed and talked about in class. For some, having this distributed with syllabuses or on the department portal sites was seen as ideal. Students also felt that quick icebreakers or warm-up games at the start of lessons was a good way to lessen the effects of not knowing who other students were. And by removing social unknowns, they wanted to expedite the process of forming more positive social dynamics between class members. And in doing so, help everyone to relax, feel more comfortable about speaking, regardless of L1 backgrounds or L2 English proficiencies. And lastly, some focus groups believe that having more student-driven support options was beneficial, especially if it could involve teaching assistants and postgraduates. All right, that is pretty much the extent of what I wanted to share with you today. So let me rest here on my final slide to acknowledge my external funders and supporters. A big thank you to them. So it's ganbaremasu for me, which is what you say in Japanese when you're going to try your best. And I'd like to end by saying to you all, thank you ever so much for listening. I do appreciate your time and attention. And if you have any questions now, I'd be very happy to try and answer them for you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. You're really interesting and really well delivered presentation there. Thank you very much. And indeed, we have got a few questions for you. Some of them more general, some of them a bit more technical. Let's just start with a slightly general one. And there's an anonymous question here. Can you say a bit more about the role of confidence in speaking fluency? For example, does it interact with ability to repair breakdowns? That was one of the things you mentioned.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I would say that confidence is essential for any type of participation. And so one thing that's strongly encouraged in this context is for students to proactively signal when there's an issue. In terms of that having a direct link to how fluent they are or not, I haven't fully considered this, but it's an interesting angle to take. In classroom situations, I often saw students code switching between English and Japanese, and that's an option for some students, but obviously there's more than just Japanese and English in the classroom. So I feel like I'm wandering slightly away from the question about fluency, but I don't have a clear answer on whether there's a connection between repair and fluency and confidence as such, but I know that students are certainly strongly encouraged to do that. Part of the EAP support they go through is about working on those essential skills. So I think confidence kind of underpins everything. And some of the general findings that I took away from the research question 3 pre-test interviews and the focus groups was that people generally felt better about speaking when they're more relaxed. And so anything that can help foster that is a positive, and one would assume that would have a positive impact on the fluency as well, but without having mapped out numbers and thought carefully about where those connections might be, I couldn't say with any certainty if there is a connection there.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next question, which is a little bit more technical, and this question comes from Shishi, who is curious about the CAF coding, the CAF coding, and are you coding these things manually, or are you using any tools for that coding?
I have used some software to help initially set up analysis of speech units, and then I'm going back and correcting or like fine-tuning those distributions of the units, and then working within those. So it's sort of part manual, part AI assisted in that sense.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Let me just have a look and see what else we've got. A question from Jayanti, who asks, says, thank you for a really interesting presentation. It's a wonderful example of a thorough case study approach. Well done there. Might I confirm that all the participants are volunteered, i.e. self-selected? How representative of the context do you think the teacher and student participants are? So do you think that might have played a role if they're self-selecting?
I think it will play a role, yes. I mean, they did self-select. There was a degree of teachers encouraging their participation when I was doing my pitches to groups to try to get people into the program, into the project, I should say. But initially, I had hoped to have sort of more uniformity across the student body. I'd hoped to potentially target one of the 5 departments and focus more exclusively on them and get people from the same year group, for example. But in the context of that university, it's very, very difficult to have a class that only has, first years in it or only has third years in it. It just doesn't work that way, because the liberal arts is a bit like a pinball machine where students are zipping all over the place and piecing together subject matters that interest them and eventually working towards something that they're specializing in. So I did get people who volunteered, and I did get some who were sort of persuaded to join by other students who'd already said yes, or by the teachers who were advocating on my behalf to this would be worth doing. So I would say that the people who said yes to participating are potentially more motivated than others, and so they may be more consciously attending to their English in ways that others might not. But this is a bilingual university, and no one goes to that university without already having some English skills and some clear expectation of using them, because it's essentially unavoidable to do so in that context. Yeah. So there are people who would prefer to do courses in Japanese, but I think they don't select courses so much based on that. They select for a variety of reasons, subject interest being the main one. But speaking to people who had very high proficiencies, it didn't really come into any consideration for them whether or not it's going to be taught in English or Japanese, and some courses would be offered in both, and it might just be more convenient to take it in English on one day or Japanese on another day, and so it's very hard to find that sort of uniform line between all participants.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. A great answer as ever. Getting the participants that we want is one of the most challenging parts of any study, in my experience. Okay, I've got another question here from Gianni, who says, congratulations on such a detailed case study. There's so much important information and you haven't even finished yet. I'm sure you mentioned this, but how was the test of English for academic purposes administered? Was it paid by funding, paid for by funding that you had, and how did you get the results?
The test of English for academic purposes, is that asking me about the TEEP test or my own test?
I think the test that you used in your study, yeah.
I mean, it was initially it was designed to be an extended version of an existing test, also called the Test of English for Academic Purposes, which is an academic test that was developed in Japan at Sophia University, and along with the Aiken Foundation of Japan. That that was co-developed and then validated, in fact, by professors here at CRELLA. But that test only went up to B2, and many of the students at this university that I'm focusing on have students who are comfortably above that. So I wanted to, at first, have a test that kind of was like a advanced version of TEEP. And through the piloting stages, it was evident that the early tasks in the original TEEP was sort of too basic and not really garnering useful spoken output from people who could comfortably complete a task that was intended to be for A1 level, like confirming that A1 level proficiency was reached, and the second task was for A2 level proficiency, and the next one was for B1, etc. So it wasn't really until I got to the sort of end of the TEEP test tasks that I was really getting to the meat of what was useful for me with students of that kind of upper intermediate type proficiency. So the question also focused on the funding. There wasn't any specific funding, unfortunately, for that, but it was co-developed with input. I say co-developed, I developed it, but I had input from the test development team at Aiken, and they were very gracious to give me time and support, and also, you know, professors here at CRELLA who are experts in the field, and that helped me sort of shepherd my way through activities that didn't really get much mileage out of them, and with tweaking them and allowing more time for others that better represented what happens in the classroom. I ended up with a 3-task test, which, you know, it's not perfect by any means, but it's much better than what I started with in Pilot 1, which is essentially TEEP plus an integrated listening into speaking task that I needed much more time for.
Brilliant, thank you. Jamie, I'm very quickly going to just try and get through a couple more questions. We've got lots, and I don't think, unfortunately, we're going to have time to get through all of them. But there's a couple more, and maybe this one is a slightly quicker answer for this one. Sylvia wanted to know, did you investigate the link between O'Sullivan et al.'s taxonomy of speaking functions and the other skills necessary for dialogic learning, collaboration, critical thinking, and problem solving?
I mean, some of the functions that I added into that list were deliberately targeting areas that we might deem to be critical thinking, like considering alternatives and weighing up the strength of the evidence, or where that evidence came from, and sort of critiquing the information and evaluating ideas in that sense. So it's sort of the O'Sullivan et al. Checklist plus a strong coating of paint of liberal arts educational philosophy and principles. So it very much marries the context of that university with O'Sullivan et al.'s function checklist. But that checklist itself is more in a view to me having a testing instrument that I can have confidence in ticks certain boxes, and speech acts are taking place that I know to be the case in the classroom, and I'm able to get closer to replicating that in the test itself. I'm not using those functions as linguistic measure or anything like that. It'd be too simplistic. But if I have time and the wherewithal, I'd like to return to my test recordings and confirm function presence versus absence to sort of return and validate that testing instrument through the same kind of approach that I used in designing it.
Brilliant. Jamie, thank you so much. You've given really detailed and informative answers to all of those questions, and a really clearly, beautifully presented presentation there. So thank you so much.